So any of you who were here, I think last October, when we had a cohort of new members join Judson, and for the first time in a while, it was a larger group than usual. You heard me basically talk about a conversation that I had with my father, who's a minister in Fort Myers, Florida, where I was hemming and hawing about, if we have 8 new members joining, and they each are invited to speak about 2 minutes about their spiritual journey, then how long should my sermon be so that we can still get out of here by 12:05-ish? And I was sort of going back and forth. My father, in the way that he does, very, very rabbinical, actually. He was just sort of asking me questions and not giving me advice. And then finally there was this moment of silence, and my father said, "Well, have you ever thought about just keeping your mouth shut?" And in October, I kept my mouth pretty shut. And we had a beautiful moment where those spiritual testimonies about journeys that were continuing and that people were hoping to continue at Judson became our sermon for the day. Well, that was about 8 people in October. And today, we have 11. We might have 10, because I believe that Jennifer, unless she's here, I think Jennifer woke up sick. So we're going to send her good energy and look forward to the next time when we welcome 15 new members. But today I think we'll stick around 10. But before I invite those 10 folks up to the front, I'm going to open my mouth for just a moment to call our attention back to our ancient and modern testimonies. Because I feel like if you've been coming around Judson for a while, or if you're paying attention to what's happening in the world, you probably see the juxtaposition between the two things. On one hand, we've got the ancient testimony that's telling us about our history of our Christian community. It's been around for about 2,000 years and was coming out of a Jewish tradition, where basically a group of people, once they had lost their leader to execution by the empire for basically being a spiritual activist in the world, they decided to pool all of their goods together and to continue to be a spiritual community in the same way that he had invited them to do, to love one another as he had taught them to love. And all of that love, all of those goods, basically birthed the community that we are still a part of today, that continues to change. I'd say that they were democratic socialists, but I don't need to, I'm talking from the pulpit here. Then you look into this modern testimony. This is by Tracy K. Smith, amazing poet, the poet laureate of the United States for a little while. This is basically what she wrote as kind of how the United States is currently welcoming refugees, asylum seekers, immigrants, migrants. And as I prepared to talk to you all in preparation for these 10 folks to join our community, I don't know if you saw it in the news this week, but an ICE agent shot a man in the face, not very far from here. A man named Gaspar, who ICE was after, was in an apartment. An ICE agent stormed that apartment, and Eric, the son of Gaspar's girlfriend, threw up his hand to shield Gaspar, and the bullet went through his hand and into his cheek. That right now is how ICE is welcoming people into this country. So, I say that just so that we continue to pay attention. I say that because as we welcome people into this community where we don't see how we can separate our spirituality, our creativity, and our justice seeking in the world, and where we in this space and when we go out into the world see that those 3 things constantly have to be intertwining, so that when we are seeking justice seeking, we are trying to creatively figure out how to look hate in the face with love, with community. We're always linking it back to our spiritual tradition. So that, to me, is why people come to Judson. That, to me, is why I come to Judson. Because if I were simply out in the world trying to rail at the powers that be and not linking it back to a spiritual community here, not linking it to more creative ways to respond that goes beyond simply screaming at a television set, I don't know what I would do. So I'm grateful for all of you. I'm grateful that we are the size we are right now. I'm grateful for the Judson community that has been here since 1892 in various iterations. I'm grateful for a continually generative Christian community that has been reforming itself for 2,000 years. And I'm grateful for the 10 people who are about to come up to this podium and tell you about their own journeys. So, Courtney, Phil, Nina, Rick, Max, Christopher, Colin, Gannon, Jillian, and Jimmy. Would you all come forward to the front here? And actually, let's make a little semicircle right in the center here. I want to center you all. These 10 folks over the past 3 weeks have been going through a program that we call Judson Discovery here, which is basically designed to have 2 tracks to it, to give the history and the present story and the future vision for Judson, and hold that side by side with the very people you see standing in front of you as they look back on their spiritual history, on their present context, and on their visions for their own continuing journey. So they're going to share with you just a bit about those journeys. We're going to go alphabetically, so sorry, Courtney. But Courtney, could you start us off?
Hello, can you hear me? Okay. So I am guilty of picking the good things out of the Bible and rejecting the things that are kind of problematic. So I'm going to share a Bible verse that I think describes my spiritual journey. It's 1 John 4:12. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us, and his love is made complete in us. I grew up in a Southern Baptist church, and I had a lot of issues with some of the things that were taught to me, but despite that, I still found a loving community and learned the most from the relationships that I formed there. My parents always had my sister and I serving at shelters and soup kitchens, running errands for some shut-ins, visiting folks in the hospital, and I found that to be most important for me spiritually. I think what I appreciate about some of my church that I grew up in, and Judson, and I guess church in general, is you attend and you are loved just by existing. The relationships I've made, it hasn't been because, like our shared talent or intelligence or we're charming. I think you love others and befriend people in your church simply because they exist. And yeah, that's what I appreciated the most. And so to summarize, I think people have affected my spiritual journey the most. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, I'm Phil Eggers, pronouns are he, him, his. I just want to say I think it's really full circle. The ancient testimony today was the ancient testimony for the first service that I came to here, so that's pretty cool. I wrote everything I'm going to say. So I started attending Judson this past November out of curiosity. I'd come face to face with a drinking problem, decided to get sober, and was fixating a bit on the idea of a greater power. I knew Judson's history and commitment to the arts, and I knew that its values tended to lean progressive, so if I was going to acquaint myself with something greater than myself, I'd figured I'd give this place a look-see. Honestly, I had some fear, though. I did grow up in a pretty devout evangelical home in North Carolina. Went to Christian school through middle school, church twice a day on Sundays, Bible study, youth group. By all accounts, I was a good Christian boy. But by the time I began to leave adolescence and enter into early adulthood, all of the messaging that I received ultimately left me with a deep sense of shame that I wasn't good enough, I wasn't deserving, a sense that no matter how hard I tried, I would always be incapable of being whole. And as a result, I became pretty cynical, bleak, and nihilistic. And really, over the past decade, the closest faith I could summon for myself would be by identifying as a part-time universalist or a non-practicing atheist. In the past couple of years, however, I started to notice that this cynicism was starting to have negative side effects in my life. And so I began to make some serious changes into my life, ultimately leading me towards sobriety, ultimately leading me to Judson. And over these past 3 months, I can't say for sure that I've really gotten to know that greater power. I do know that the Gospel of Matthew says where 2 or more are gathered in my name, I am there with them. And when I'm gathered with each of you here this on Sundays, I feel about as close to a loving God as I've ever felt in my life. Mike asked us what we kind of want out of a spiritual home, and honestly, I can't say I know for sure. But I feel that Judson is a place where it is okay to be unsure. In the end, I know I feel better walking out of these doors than I did walking in. And with your blessing and approval, I hope I can call Judson a place to which I can grow and discover and to give some part of myself over to. Thanks.
Erwin Mann, Martin Burrow, Howard Sharp, Lori Moody, Andy France, Ralph Lewis, Louise Green, Peter Lorman, Roger and Alice Deakins, Russ Trays and Alice Elliott, Grace Goodman, Sue Harwick, Paul Holzer, Susan Diestroth, Clover Vale, Michael and Lana Ellick, Michael Busey, Matt Cleaver, Carl, the Christian dog, Carl and Mary Ellen Baldwin, Gene Ovid, Mary Nell Hawk, John Tenney, Bethany Drexel, S.E. Borden, Lee Gilead, Rethel Bean, Holly Bean, Jane Lucas, Craig Keel, Jack Lawrence, Kim, Martha Gottwald, Suzanne Dickerson, Harry Katukas, David Johnson, Roland, Zach, Johnny Goodman, Johnny Be Good, Robert Kraft and Irene and Sarah Kraft, Bill, Bible-toting Smith, Jenny Selig, ukulele-toting, Suresh, who could not be with us today, Kirsten, David, Valerie Holly, Keen Berger, Peggy and Maureen McNamara, Matthew, Rose and Ann James, Robert Reese, Bob Thomason and Jane Thomason, and their kids, Donna Scopper, and her personal assistant, Warren Goldstein, Jeff. Can barely read my writing that I scribbled on the back of this morning. Oh, Adonias Judson and Edward Judson, Marianne Napoli of the Center for Medical Consumers, John D. Rockefeller, Megan Wolfe, Reverend Spike, Abigail Hastings.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Max, pronouns he, him, his. And it seems like everyone else wrote notes or something to read off of, and I didn't do that. I'm just relying on my memory, so here we go. My spiritual journey, to give you a little context, both sets of my grandparents were very religious in their own right. My dad's mom, very strict Catholic, to the point where I love her, but she shoved it down her sons' throats, and then none of her sons ended up being religious. My mom's side of the family, they also were very involved in the Catholic Church. They were a little more progressive. I think that if there was a Judson in Auburn, New York, they'd probably have gone there, but they only had the Catholic Church, and that's what they knew. So that kind of found its way down to me and my brother, and we went to Catholic school. I went through second grade, and that really wasn't for me. I felt that I was told what to believe, and since I was told what to believe, I was afraid to ask any questions and to kind of challenge what I was told to believe. The second thing was that I always felt bad going to church because I felt like that Catholic guilt, no offense to any Catholics in the room, but there's a Catholic guilt, the sense that you are a sinner and you have to repent. And that's really all I got out, as a kid, that's all I really got out of it. So I felt guilty going to church every week because I had to ask forgiveness for all the bad things that I would do as a kid. And so after I went to public school, I took the church out of my life. I just didn't think about it anymore. We went on Christmas and Easter, but that was really the extent of I had any sort of spiritual or religious part of my life. Fast forward when I went to, after undergrad, I moved to Florida for 5 years, and in that time period, there was something missing, and I felt like I wanted to be able to explore some spiritual component of my life, and in a sense of, and to do so with a community. And when I had moved to Florida, I had recently come out, and so I was saying to myself, where are the gays going to church? They have to be going somewhere, and they have to be accepted somewhere. And so I went around a little bit, but then when I went to Miami, I found this UCC church that actually had a light bulb in there. That there's actually places that people can go and be welcomed. When I went to the church, and I've heard the same phrase here, and so I knew that when I came here, I was going to have the same feelings. But the first thing that pastor had said was, no matter who you are, where you come from, or where you are in life's journey, you are welcome here. And that was a really big eye-opener for me. And the next thing that she said was that they took the Bible seriously, but not literally. And that really spoke to me as well, because that allowed me to have a different interpretation. I could question things that I heard. I could question things that I was taught. And I could do that in a room where everyone had different questions, or they were seeking their own journey. And so it became for me a sense of what I was looking for when I moved to New York was a place where I was welcomed, and a place that we all could be on a spiritual journey together. And we're not in the same place. I have so many things to figure out, and I feel like I have nothing figured out most days. But the fact is that we're all on some journey, and that we're doing it together, and that's what I felt with Judson, and that's why I'm here today.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Christopher. Pronouns are he, him, his. So one of the overarching themes of Judson Discovery was that if you don't like the question that was asked to you, answer a different question. So I'm going to answer a slightly different question, and instead of talking about my spiritual journey, I'm going to talk about the person who sort of opened the door to that spiritual journey, which is my grandmother. Sorry, I'm just turning up the brightness on my phone. My grandmother was born in Italy, and she moved to the US in the aftermath of World War II. And like any good Italian woman, she is, of course, Roman Catholic. And Roman Catholic to the point that there are more pictures of saints in her home than her grandchildren. There is a Mary in a shrine in the backyard. There are rosary beads hanging from every conceivable surface, and she is at church every Sunday. So to me, she's someone who always seemed so sure of her faith, very staunch in her beliefs, and like she really knew what she was doing. She knew what she believed in. But fortunately, my grandmother and I have a very good relationship, and as I got older, our conversations about God, about religion, about social issues deepened. And I started to realize that there was a lot more going on there under the surface than she ever let on. I learned that she has a favorite rabbi whose column she cuts out of the newspaper every week and saves. I learned that she reads books by Muslim scholars, and I learned that she often reads about Catholic social teaching and enjoys debating it with her friends, things that she never let on to her family and she never let on to me. And so as we started having these conversations, and as I was having my own doubts about the Catholic Church and what I had been told and what I had been taught, I realized that it's okay to question and it's okay to doubt. And so part of the reason that I feel drawn to Judson and part of the reason I feel comfortable here is because it is a community where no matter where you are in your faith, no matter what questions you have, no matter what debates you want to have, and no matter how much you disagree with what's being told to you, there's an open space for that, and there's an open space for dialogue. And so part of the reason I really feel comfortable here is because I know that my grandmother would also feel comfortable here, and would also feel comfortable here on her faith journey, which is ongoing despite the pictures of saints everywhere. And so I really look forward to having these debates and having these conversations and being welcomed into this group. Thank you.
Hi. I don't have notes. Don't be unduly alarmed. I've done this before. A long, long time ago when I was younger, I was in a community that was very loving and very alive and very active. And within it, I was in a faith community that was very loving and very alive and very active. And when I came of age, they asked me to affirm two questions very seriously. Would I accept Jesus Christ as my personal Savior? And would I reject Satan and all his works? And my journey began by realizing that I should have been more alarmed that issues of such gravity only required two questions, multiple choice. To fast forward a little bit, part of that has been realizing the complexity around answering yes to the first one, where I see people, some of whom I like and respect, in public forums talking about who's not going to make it into the heavenly city. And I'm really sure the parable of the narrow gate is about the door, not the wall. I really think that we need some sort of glue to bind us together. And then I think about why I think that, and I look at my own life. I speak in abstractions, and my work is primarily abstractions. And in retrospect, I look back at how much harm can be done by a simple keystroke or whenever we don't see one another or the consequences of our actions. And what brought me to Judson is the realization that the things that matter, resolving doubt or belief or anything, is finding unmerited grace from other people or God or whoever, and finding some sort of truth. Here we refer to it as theater or art, but it's the abstraction that allows us to see ourselves in something imperfect and then make it real. And I just wanted to be in a place where people were alive in the way that I remembered good alive feeling, and thinking about being able to work towards and leave something that was alive. And hopefully there's a level of service I can provide that would allow me to be part of that.
All right, first of all, just thank you. I just want to say thank you to the Judson community for welcoming me here. My name is Gannon, and my pronouns are he, him, his. So a little bit about me. I'm originally from Birmingham, Alabama. Similar to some of the other members, I grew up in an evangelical church, went to a private Christian high school, the whole 9 yards. And so one thing for me, and as far back as I can remember, I've always been a Christian, and I've always had faith as some part in my life. That's been a constant. but what has changed is my interpretation of that faith. And where once I used my faith to justify certain types of bigotry, I now try to use my faith to fight that and to fight for a more equitable society. What I'm looking forward to learning from and being challenged by the community here at Judson, and also growing together in the justice that Judson advocates for, the art that we experience and create here, and finally the faith that we all hold together. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jillian, pronoun she, her. I also don't have notes. I practice talking to myself out loud on the subway, so very normal for New York City, nobody minded. I'm also very nervous feeling, which I'm trying to be okay with because it means that this matters. So 10 years ago, around this time, I got confirmed in my congregational church. And I had an agreement with my parents where if I got confirmed and gave the speech in front of everyone, I would be able to choose if I could go to church or not after that. So I literally gave a speech to my entire church. My friends were there just like right now. And I told them why I believed in God and why I believed in Jesus. And I used all these quotes from the Bible, and it was really great and very convincing. And then I never went back to church after that. So it seems like some of you might relate to that. So now it's 10 years later. I'm 26 years old. I don't want to lie. I'm not sure where I am on my spiritual journey, and I love this place because you all give me permission to figure it out with you. And this is really the only church I've been in that I feel like calls me to a higher place, where there's all of this, everyone's starting with their pronouns, and there's glitter, and there's social justice, and there's talk about race, and there's show tunes, and there's pastors with nail polish. And I was like, what is this place? This is incredible. So I'm not sure what my journey here looks like, but I know I want to be a part of this, and I know that being a member makes it mean more, and I'm already feeling more committed because I didn't feel nervous just sitting in the pews at Judson, but being here and standing here and committing to all of you that I will be in service to you in some way that I have not figured out yet. It matters, and I feel it in my body, so thank you, and I'm excited to be a member, hopefully.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jimmy Tobias, pronouns he, him. I also feel that important nervous energy going on. My spiritual journey began in Michigan, where I went to this little Presbyterian church with my family. We went there on Wednesday nights for dinner every week. My grandma wrote the newsletter. My parents still go, and my grandparents are buried there, and it was a really wholesome place. When I was 18, I came out and kind of separated from Christianity for a while. I was pretty angry about the way priests and pastors in this country talk about gay people, but I never lost my curiosity about religion. I was always really interested in reading about Catholic liberation theology and Buddhism and Taoism and the religious underpinnings of the civil rights movement and the anti-war movement. And so that all that stuff fascinated me, and it sort of laid the groundwork what was to come later. Because in my 20s, I feel like that was a really solid period of spiritual growth. First, I lived for a few months at this multiracial Christian intentional community in South Georgia called Koinonia, and it was this beautiful place where everyday people were living the ethic of loving your neighbor as yourself, and they had all sorts of problems and squabbles, of course, but everyone came around to lunch every day and sat together and shared, and it was beautiful. And then I moved out west to work for the Forest Service in Idaho and Montana, and spent many months in the woods every year. And it was this front row seat to the life and death and joy and suffering that sort of suffuses reality. And it was just this incredible direct experience of nature, and it sort of convinced me that there's this life-giving grace that is part of all life. And it was just it was amazing. And also in that same period, I developed some incredible relationships and deep friendships that are sort of remind me every day that miracles are real. At this point in my life, there are a few convictions I feel relatively certain about. One is that even though our lives are fleeting, that God loves us no matter what. The other thing I've really been appreciating lately is the story of the resurrection. You know, it's like this powerful symbol of political dissent and also this metaphor for how life springs from death in this like unending chain of being, and that just gives me solace. And I'm also really excited to be here at Judson. This place is so beautiful, and I've loved it so much for the last couple years. I've been sporadically coming, and I just want to get to know all of you and continue on this path, trying to learn from lessons, from the great lessons that our tradition teaches us, whether it's the Sermon on the Mount or the Prayer of St. Francis or things like that. So I'm really excited, and thank you.
Well, I didn't prepare anything, but my spiritual journey started without my knowing, and I went 10 years to a Catholic school. So I'm grateful because it gave me a strong foundation of a belief. But I didn't agree with everything, and growing up in a neighborhood that started out to be everything, ended up being really strict. I knew that my friends were from all different ways of life, and God didn't just love me because I was Catholic. That seemed so ridiculous. So about 10 years ago, someone I thought was one of the biggest sinners I ever knew, and I thought was going to a party. I said, "What are you doing out here?" He says, "I'm coming from church." I said, "What kind of church lets you in?" And he said, "The same kind of church that'll let you in." And I went to that church, and these people were like so on fire, like they were like so emotional. And I thought, like, I just want to know what they know. And this little Indian lady put her hand on my head, and she said, "Jesus says he's real." And I go, "Oh my God," I really, like, that was it for me for a little while, until everything there exploded. There were so many prejudices against little things inside. I said, "This is so social. This is not what you have to believe what they believe again." And they didn't, you couldn't be gay, you had to believe the way they believed. And it went against what I understood in my heart. I've been Buddhist, tried it. I've tried so many things. And the only time I felt, or the first time I felt like I could just be anything and believe in spirituality, I was in Asia, and they were planting little flowers and burning incense. And I said, "This is spirituality. They're just praying. What is that in the window?" My wife just wishes me good luck. This is like, that to me, that's community. They prayed for me, they prayed for my daughter, and when I came to Judson, I felt, I've lived here for over almost 30 years, and I can't believe this is in my backyard. All my friends from all different ages and beliefs would be welcome here. And finally, I found a church that I feel welcome. So thank you.